Good evening, everybody. Welcome. Happy December. If you're in Flagstaff, you might be getting a little bit of snow right now. I'm kind of super excited about that. Wasn't expecting a small flurry tonight. My name is Megan Remington. I'm our Community Education Coordinator here at Coconino Community College. I'm so happy to have everybody here with us tonight. We've got a great presentation ahead of us. I just want to say a few quick things. If you've never been on a webinar before, want to make sure you understand how we're interacting with you tonight. So we have two different options. One of them is a chat box. You can see that on your right side, or there's a little button at the bottom of your Zoom panel where you can click on the chat box. And the other is a Q&A function where you can ask your questions. We are going to try to focus on answering questions at the end of the lecture. So if you ask a question, it doesn't get covered right away, don't worry, we didn't forget you. We'll make sure we take care of you at the end. When we finish the presentation, when you close and log out, it will actually take you straight to a survey to let us know how we've done, what you'd like to learn next. We'd really appreciate if you'd take that survey and give us your feedback, and make sure that you, if you haven't already, register for next week's Comet Talk. We're partnering with the Coconino Center for the Arts. We're talking about their art exhibit Parched and how it was all put together. We get kind of a special behind the scenes look at how everything goes. I'll make sure to include that link in the post lecture email that goes out to everybody. And otherwise, I think this was a record for how quickly I got done talking. So with that, Amy, I am going to go ahead and mute myself and disappear, and you go ahead and introduce yourself, and thank you so much.
Great, thanks, Megan. So hello, everyone. My name is Amy Schott. I'm the lead archaeologist at Glen Canyon National Recreation Area. And I'm just gonna give a little background on me and how I got here, so you know kind of the background behind my knowledge for this talk. So I'm an archaeologist with the Park Service, and I've been with the Park Service for about 10 years. I've only been in this park for a year, so I'm still learning about this park. Before that, I worked at Petrified Forest National Park for 9 years. My sort of research specialty background is the field of geoarchaeology. So most of my research has been looking at geoscience applications to the field of archaeology, especially studying soils and geomorphology. And I did my master's and PhD work at the University of Arizona. So that's about me. The talk tonight, I'll be focusing on what it's like to be an archaeologist in the National Park Service, what kind of work we do. If you're already familiar with archaeology in the Southwest, this talk will focus a little more on what does archaeology look like in the Park Service and how that might be different from some other avenues that archaeology gets done. Sometimes archaeology is done by contractors or researchers or professors or students, and all of those fields look a little bit different. So hopefully this is a different talk for many of you. And then I'll be looking at a lot of the management side. What is it like to manage in a National Park Service? And then I'll finish up with talking about some of our current projects. What do we have ongoing right now? And then some of the biggest challenges we face as archaeologists in the National Park Service. So this will be kind of a broad look at what archaeology is like in this context, and less of a specific focus on research questions or research results from a particular project. So pretty broad overview. So to start with, let's take a quick poll. I want to get a sense of how many of you have ever been to Glen Canyon? Do you know where this park is? You can check all of these that apply. If you've been to any parts of the park, if you've been all over the park, boating, been to Horseshoe Bend, just go ahead and check in the poll and let us know. We'll wait a minute for this result to come up so we can see.
Oh yeah, it looks like you've got a good number of folks who've done at least some visiting.
I'll give it a few more seconds. I can't see the result.
Oh yeah, I'll flip it around as soon as, sorry, I forgot about that part.
Oh, okay.
Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and close it in 3, 2, 1. And we'll go ahead and share those results.
Okay, looks like lots of folks have at least been to some parts of the park. And oh, lots of folks who work here. Oh, that's fun. Okay, so maybe this talk won't be entirely new for a lot of you. You might see places and things you recognize, but I still hope it's a little bit interesting. So I'll just start off with a little bit of background. Where is Glen Canyon National Recreation Area? There's a map there on the right, and we cross the border between Arizona and Utah. And one of the things that's really interesting in this park is that it's really diverse. So if you've been here and you're familiar with the park, you'll probably know this already. The park includes Lake Powell. We include a lot of tributary canyons that enter Lake Powell. We include a stretch of the Colorado River below the dam, so just a regular river corridor. And then a lot of the tributary canyons into the lake, some of them are underwater and part of the lake, and some of them are just kind of natural riparian corridors. We have mesas and canyons and plateaus, and a lot of our park is pretty remote. So this is a pretty diverse place. And so, of course, the archaeology in the park is also pretty diverse. If you're not really familiar with the National Park Service, you'll also notice I keep using this phrase, national park. Technically, we're a national recreation area. As a Park Service archaeologist, I don't see a lot of difference. There is a little bit of a legal difference. The National Recreation Area has a legal mandate that actually requires us to focus a little more on recreation in the park. But in all other respects, we're just like a national park with the same focus on protecting resources and managing things. So when I use that phrase national park, that is why, even though technically it's a national recreation area. Glen Canyon is 1.25 million acres of land. This is a huge park. About 13% of it is under Lake Powell. That number fluctuates a tiny bit as the lake goes up and down. The actual amount of underwater changes a little bit, and that affects the archaeology pretty significantly. And so that's a challenge that will come up again at the end of the talk. So just to keep in the back of your mind, really diverse landscape spread out over a large area. Okay, so we're going to do another poll. I hope this is not brand new to everyone, but what do I mean when I talk about archaeology? And when I talk to National Park Service visitors, I often get these kinds of questions like, what are you studying? What is an archaeologist? So go ahead and you can check as many as you think apply to the field of archaeology. Just want to get a sense of everyone's background, where you're coming from. And I realize these are oversimplified responses, but check as many as you think might apply. And then I'll talk about why maybe we have some misconceptions and where some of these fit better.
And in case anybody is concerned, we do not know what your answers are, so you don't have to worry about being completely wrong.
Yeah, the poll just shows how many people checked each box. So take your best guess.
I'm gonna go ahead and end now.
Okay. Well, overwhelming number of people said artifacts and historic structures. So that's great. Okay, here are my answers. So the study of dinosaurs and fossils is not archaeology. This is a really common misconception. It's the field of paleontology. Most paleontologists have a geology or biology background. I think a lot of paleobiology would fall into that category also. We get them confused, I think, because they're both fields of study that involve looking at things that are often found underground and we dig them up. But they're very different, and other than being in the ground, there isn't actually a whole lot in common between the two fields. So that's a really common misconception, that if you've never studied either of these fields, it's pretty common. So not talking about paleontology tonight, although a lot of Park Service archaeologists work with paleontologists because a number of parks have paleontologists on staff also. The study of rocks and earth processes in general usually fits in the field of geology. There's a bit of overlap sometimes because archaeologists dig things out of the ground. We often have to understand the ground surface. So like my own research background is using geology in archaeology. So those earth processes to understand, how artifacts came to be where they are. But we typically don't do a lot of study of rocks and earth processes just for its own sake. The study of artifacts and historic structures is a pretty oversimplified term for archaeology, but that's typically what we're talking about. The things that are left when people move on from wherever they were, permanently or temporarily. When people were living somewhere, they leave things behind, and those tend to be artifacts and features and buildings, and that's what archaeologists study. But we usually study them in the larger context of an anthropology framework. And that more broadly looks at people and societies in all times and places. So some anthropologists mostly look at people and societies in the modern world, and archaeologists are those anthropologists who are looking at the past. So we typically look at the past through the studies of the things left behind. We call that material culture. So if you answered both C or D, you were the most correct in this poll. But hopefully we're all here to learn. So if you got it wrong, that's all right. Okay, so in the National Park Service, what does archaeology look like? And what is the whole field of archaeology about anyway? I think of archaeology as kind of having three avenues. There's the research side, the preservation side, and the compliance side. And these all apply in the National Park Service. And typically, archaeologists are trained in doing all three of these. But we also find that a lot of archaeologists, your specific job you take might focus on one of these more heavily. So professors whose main goal is to teach and do research might focus much more heavily on the research side, or folks in museums who have a research-oriented job, they might do a lot more research than they do preservation or compliance. A lot of archaeologists who work in the private sector may do a lot more compliance work. So we tend to be trained in all three of these avenues, but a lot of us will specialize more heavily in one or two, depending on our job and where we work and what we focus on. So thinking of these three avenues, research, preservation, and compliance, what does this look like in a Park Service context? So preservation is one of our big focuses on the National Park Service. The whole Park Service was founded with the goal of preserving things. And this is written right into founding legislation. The Organic Act of 1916, when the Park Service was created, includes this phrase, conserving scenery and the natural and historic objects and providing for the enjoyment to leave them unimpaired. So this is a pretty heavy mandate on parks to conserve what's there and then leave them unimpaired. And we do a lot of that through preserving them as they are. So preservation is a really big part of what we do. And I'll get into some more details about that as we go down the line. But think about preservation. It's a pretty big mandate when you think about the scale of a park. We have over 2,500 known archaeological and historical sites in our park, and preserving all of them is really an impossible task. So how do we do that? That's one of our challenges, but it's a big focus of parks. If you've visited national parks, you've probably visited some archaeological sites that have been preserved in a way that opens them up safely to visitors to go in and look at them. Some of the sites that we preserve are specifically preserved with a visitation component in mind. So in the poll at the beginning, a lot of you said you had been to Lees Ferry. Lees Ferry is one of the historic districts in the park. It has a whole suite of historic structures, and a lot of those are preserved just so that visitors can go there and learn. The compliance aspect of archaeology is one that a lot of folks outside of archaeology are probably less familiar with. Compliance means complying with all of the laws that deal with cultural resources. I've listed a whole bunch there on the side of the screen. This is just some of the federal laws about preserving, protecting, and managing cultural resources in the US. So these federal laws apply on federal land and in other contexts also. But as a federal land managing agency, these all directly apply to us. So compliance means, as an archaeologist in the park, every time the park is doing a project, anything, they're doing a project for visitors, they're maintaining a building, putting in a water line, they're building a trail, they're upgrading a road. Every time we do anything, we have to make sure that the project is complying with all of these laws. And the goal being that the project is not having any damaging effects on cultural or archaeological resources. So how we do that, it does involve a lot of paperwork. It also involves, for example, if they're going to do work in an area of the park where we don't know what's there. My crew will go out, we'll do an archaeological survey, we'll look at the landscape, and we'll find out, are there any archaeological sites in the way that we have to worry about? So we'll do a survey. Currently, we have surveyed something like 5% of our park. That's really small, but it's a big park. So we have a lot of land in this park where we've never even looked for archaeological resources, and we don't really know what's there. But as we do more projects, roads, trails, visitor services, we go out and survey those new areas to document what's there. And then we can make sure that the project doesn't have any effect on the resource. This is a big way that parks maintain archaeological resources and protect them. This process can take a lot of our time, especially in a visitor-oriented recreation area where there's a lot happening. But it also means that we have a prescribed way to make sure that whatever we're doing, we're protecting cultural resources. And the picture there on the screen is actually a housing unit in the town of Page, but it's a historic resource, so it's one of those things that we protect. And the last avenue is research. Research is just what it sounds like, doing something just for knowledge, just to learn. And there's all sorts of great research we can do in the Park Service. We do a lot of research through research partnerships with other groups, with universities, with students, because as a park staff, we just don't have the capacity to do big research projects ourselves. And then we also try to fit those research questions into other kinds of projects. So something we'll do if we have a compliance project where we're doing a new survey, for example, we would build some research questions into that survey so that we make sure that as we're doing our work, we're doing it with the best scientific practices. Research is a little bit harder for us to fund. So this is why we try to get research done through other pathways. We don't usually get money in the Park Service just to do a big study to learn something new. But we do get more money for the compliance and preservation side, so we try to build research into that. But research isn't quite as big of a focus for us. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about what are some of our common and less common cultural resources in Glen Canyon. But first, if everyone could share in the chat box, what do you think is included in that term, cultural resource? How might you define it, or what are some things that you think might be included in that category? So go ahead and answer in the chat, and just send your answers out. You can answer as many or as few times as you want, and make sure you hit on the 2 button, all panelists, so that everyone in the, to all audience, I think is what it's called. So everyone can see. Is that right, Megan?
Yeah, it's all panelists and attendees. So then that way the panelists and everybody on the other side can see it.
Yeah, so just give us all your examples. What is included in this term, cultural resource? Because I have not defined the term yet. What do I mean when I'm talking about that? maybe you have no clue. Take your best guess. Maybe you've been to a park and you've seen something that you think is a cultural resource. Go ahead and write that down. Buildings, yes, buildings can be cultural resources. Tools, religious sites, waterways, ruins, petroglyphs, artifacts. Great answers. Evidence of human activities, pottery. Okay, so I'm glad it's not a totally new term for everyone. You have some sense of what I mean when I say cultural resources. And I'm getting the sense that folks kind of understand this is a really broad term. It includes lots of things. Fossils. Fossils can sometimes be cultural resources because they are often important to Native people in understanding the past. So not all fossils, but some of them are, yes. Forms of communication, yeah. So we include a lot of things in this term, cultural resources. Our most common by number type of resource is an archaeological site. So out of all the cultural resources in our park, most of them fall under this category of archaeological sites. And these are what you would traditionally think of pueblos, granaries, petroglyphs, pictographs, storage bins, features like storage pits dug into a hard soil, these places where people in the past lived or camped or did some kind of activity and left something behind. These can be pretty diverse in themselves. You notice I've just put up about 5 right there, but these can range from really large multi-room structures where, you know, there may have been a whole village of people for decades or longer, to little small camps that may have just been a few people camping for a very small amount of time, making tools, processing food, or doing a very specific activity. So our archaeological sites can really range from really large scale Pueblo ruins to an artifact scatter with a handful of flakes and pottery sherds and just a handful of artifacts left behind. So this is our most common. So when we're dealing with cultural resources in general, this is what we use a lot of the time, or this is what takes up a lot of our time. As we're managing archaeological resources, these are what we often put a lot of our preservation efforts into. We can't really feasibly protect all of them in the sense of regular maintenance and work at them, but we pick out a few that are really a really unique one or a really good example of something, and those are the ones that we put more of our energies into preserving. As a park, we try to protect a lot of them just by leaving them as they are and encouraging visitors to visit respectfully. So this is what we deal with a lot of the time, but there's a whole lot of other things that are included in cultural resources in our park. So historic buildings and objects, I think someone mentioned this in the poll. We have your traditional historic buildings like those down at Lonely Dell and Lee's Ferry, masonry or wood buildings that you can go visit as a visitor and learn about, you know, a historic homestead or something like that. We have historic machinery. The Lonely Dell Orchard is a historic resource. We have historic mining operations in the park. And interestingly, as I mentioned before, we have historic homes that are part of the town of Page that are now old enough to be considered a historic resource. And so that's a cultural thing that we protect. I'm using the term historic, maybe a little different than what some folks are used to. We use the term historic to mean all of these things from the past, from the modern era all the way back into what is sometimes termed prehistoric, the history before we have a lot of written record. But in the Park Service and legally, we use that term historic to kind of encompass all of these things. Historic trails and roads are another category of cultural resource. We have trails. The one in the picture is the Spencer Trail, which goes from Lee's Ferry straight up the cliff. And you can go hike it. It's a lot of fun. But we include a lot of historic trails in the park. The Hole in the Rock Road is a historic travel route. The Honeymoon Road, which goes through Lee's Ferry also, and many others across the park. These can be a little more challenging to manage as a cultural resource, especially the really long trails, because the footprint on the ground is not, it's not a nice concrete, well-defined boundary the way a lot of sites are. And so managing these can be a lot trickier. Do we manage the whole thing? Do we manage significant parts of it? So that can be a bigger challenge, but these are included as our cultural resources. And if you drive around to some of the backcountry areas, a lot of the roads follow historic travel routes and trails. Artifacts are probably something else a lot of you are familiar with. The artifacts, I guess a good definition of what an artifact is that it would be the portable object from a historic or prehistoric site. So the things that are movable. And these include, like you'll see in the photos there, some stone tools, manos and metates used for grinding and processing food. We have lots of sites that are of an age to have pottery sherds. We get sites from later in time that have cans and bottles and glass and more objects that are similar to modern day ones. We include in artifacts things that are like plant remains and cordage and things made out of plants. We actually have pretty remarkable preservation of artifacts in a lot of our alcoves that you don't get in other environments, because alcoves are really protected environments. Those fragile artifacts like matting and cordage are protected and preserved pretty well. So we get some of that. We traditionally, archaeologists traditionally have done a lot of collecting artifacts. If you would go out and document a site, you might collect a sample of what you found there and put it in the museum. We don't do a lot of that anymore. This is another common misconception about what archaeologists do. A lot of the times we go out in the field, we document what's on the surface, and then we just leave it there. We do the analysis in the field and we leave it. Part of that is because the cost and space for storing objects in museums is really high, and museums are getting full and they don't have a lot of room to take in more artifacts just for the sake of taking them in. So unless we have a really good reason to collect artifacts, we don't collect them and put them in the museum. We just leave them where they are in the field. This creates a challenge in a park where visitors come through, because at a lot of sites, if visitors go through, they'll see artifacts left on the surface. And a lot of folks don't quite know what to do, and they collect them, which of course is not what we'd like to see in the Park Service. So if you are visiting a site, just remember that we don't want you to collect artifacts. The one you see on the far left of that slide there, that's actually a pile that visitors went to a site, collected all these things and put them in a pile, which is really not helpful. So sometimes what we'll do in order to sort of protect that and keep anyone from stealing them, we might take a collector's pile like that and just bury it to leave it as less of a target. Okay, and then one other kind of cultural resource that may be a little less familiar to some of you is a traditional cultural property. And these are interesting because they don't actually have to be historic or of a certain age. Traditional cultural properties could be things that are not even old at all. They have to have a certain level of significance to traditional people. And the Rainbow Bridge National Monument, which you see in the photo there, is a traditional cultural property. And its importance certainly goes way back in time. It's been a very important cultural site for a long time, but it continues to be important to modern Native peoples. So We have a number of traditional cultural properties in the park, and then we manage the Rainbow Bridge National Monument. So that's a pretty short overview of what are the cultural resources that we manage in the park. So next I'm going to go into some of our current projects. What does our day-to-day work look like as we're managing all those cultural resources? What are the things that we're doing? So I'm going to go through some of our current projects. If you have questions about these at the end, I'd be happy to talk more about anything that sparks your interest. So one of our big projects is monitoring archaeological sites. These are sites that we know about. They've been recorded at some point in the past, maybe last year, maybe in 1959. At some point we recorded them, we know what's there, and now we go back and we revisit the sites and we monitor what it looks like now. This is kind of done for two reasons. In one, this helps us determine which sites are seeing erosion, which sites are seeing visitor impacts, graffiti, vandalism, cattle, anything that's impacting the site. This helps us know which sites are in the worst shape, which ones are in the biggest risks that we need to go in and take action to do some kind of preservation or stabilization treatment. So a lot of our sites are monitored on a rolling basis, maybe every 5 years or 10 years or 20 years. Kind of depends how easy it is to get to the site and how much we think it's threatened. The other reason we do monitoring, because even though we monitor all of our sites to some extent, some of them are really hard to get to, so they don't get monitored very often. But in practice, we try to monitor lots of our sites as often as we can. In addition to the like targeting sites that need stabilization, the other goal is the monitoring can be a sort of data recovery in itself. We don't do a lot of excavation in the Park Service. Excavation tends to only happen if something is in danger of being lost. It's in immediate danger of eroding and disappearing forever, or it's in a place where we need to put something, a water line, a road, and it can't go anywhere else. Then we might go and do data recovery or excavation and actually excavate a site in order to recover it before it's lost. But we don't do that very often because of our main goal being preservation. But a lot of sites have some kinds of natural erosion where the site is just gradually being exposed over time. So if we go back and monitor it every so often, we'll sometimes see new things that weren't there maybe 30 years ago when it was recorded. And so on those monitoring trips, we can document that new information, and it gives us a more complete picture of what is at each site, which helps us manage at the landscape scale. So another big project is doing that kind of monitoring on the Colorado River reach. So as I mentioned in the beginning, when I talked about the park background, we have a small portion of the Colorado River below the dam. It's about 15 miles. And the dam has really affected the river down there. Like the whole river is controlled by how much water passes through the dam. So it's completely a human controlled environment. And that has led to, in some places on the Colorado River, pretty severe erosion, which impacts archaeological sites. And so for years now, the Bureau of Reclamation, which manages the Glen Canyon Dam, has been doing high flow events, which the goal is to release a high flow of water and some sediment to help build up some of those places downriver where sediment is eroding and can't be replenished because the dam blocks sediment from going downstream. So one of our long-term projects is monitoring sites along the stretch of the river to look at, okay, where is erosion happening the most? How fast is erosion happening? And do these high stream flow events impact the sites? Are they actually building back up with more sediment? So this is a big project that's kind of been ongoing since the early 1990s. And one of the things we've recently added, they did a lot of repeat photography in the 90s. And now, instead of just doing repeat photography, we've actually added in photogrammetry, which is a tool that uses, you basically take like thousands of photographs across a site. Some of them you can just take your normal camera and go like this and take lots of photos. And then you can also raise the camera up in the air, like on a balloon or on a pole, and you can get all these vertical photographs from above. And you put all those photos in a software and it like stitches them all together to create a 3D model. So this is a new technology where we're just starting out using that photogrammetry to model, okay, this is a terrace with an archaeological site, and get a really high resolution data set on how much that's eroding or being replenished through these high stream flow events. When we can, we try to do survey in new areas. We might be on the lake, we might be in a marina or a road, but when we can, this tends to be tied to projects happening in the park. We'll go out and we'll do a survey and try to find new archaeological sites. As I mentioned before, something only like 5% of the park has been surveyed. So that means we have 95% of our park still to be surveyed. And so we're always trying to fit new surveys in when we can. Lakeshore impacts. This is a project we've been working on with our partners at the Museum of Northern Arizona. And what they're doing is we're looking at sites that are near the lakeshore, either right close to it or used to be underwater when the lake was higher, to look at what is the effect of being inundated on those sites. And this has been really interesting. What the Museum of Northern Arizona folks have found is that a lot of sites that were underwater are actually not gone. Being underwater certainly impacts sites, but some of them less than we thought. Some of them are completely destroyed, and some of them are still standing. It seems like the biggest destruction is those sites that were near the lakeshore and they were either repeatedly exposed and inundated over time, and that can create more impacts. And then sites that were near maybe a steep cliff or something and saw a lot of wave action, those sites have more serious impacts. But sites that were just inundated underwater and just left alone without a whole lot of water movement or change for 50 years, and now they're exposed, are actually sometimes pretty intact. So that's really fascinating research, which is really important because we have a lot of areas that are along the lakeshore and a lot of sites in that zone. And then another project we're working on also with the Museum of Northern Arizona folks is looking at grazing impacts. So because we are a recreation area and not a traditional national park, our park is actually mandated to allow grazing in the park. So there's a number of areas in the park that are grazed. They have cattle, and that can do some damage to sites. So this project is looking at, okay, what kinds of damage? Where do we see the most damage? Which sites could be protected? Which could you put a fence across? And so they're looking at this on a really large scale to look at, okay, what are some future things we could do to plan, to mitigate, to protect sites? This is ongoing, so we don't have all their results yet, but we know that grazing impacts sites, and we want to go a step further to look at, okay, well, what can we do about it? And let's make sure that if we're doing something about it, we're really targeting areas that are going to benefit the most from protection. And then I've talked a lot about this so far, but just to hammer home the idea that the preservation and stabilization is a big part of what we do. So a lot of times this looks like a subset of our sites are chosen to be preserved. And when they're in bad shape, as you see, the one in the picture here is in pretty rough shape. The mortar's eroding, the wall is starting to separate from the other wall. A structure like this, we might go in and stabilize it. We might stabilize the wall, brace it, stabilize the foundation of the structure, repoint the mortar, and get it back to a good condition where visitors could then see what did this structure look like when it was used, and just protect it from eroding away completely. So those are some of our many ongoing projects. And next I want to go into what are the biggest challenges as a Park Service cultural resource branch. And just take your best guess, share in the comments, what do you think might be some of our biggest challenges? I've touched on a little bit of these as I went through earlier in the slide, but just your best guess. What do you guys think? Humans are a challenge. Funding is a big challenge. Yeah. Not enough people. Well, not enough staff, maybe. We certainly have enough people visiting the park. Uninformed visitors. Yes. Visitors are less of a problem when they are well informed. Too many people. Yeah, sometimes even if people are well informed, you can have too many of them. Sounds like you guys are a little familiar with how parks work. So specifically in Glen Canyon, I'm going to touch on what might be a little more unique here that isn't quite as prominent elsewhere. A big challenge in many parks is balancing the preservation with the visitor experience. While visitors coming to the park often do more damage than anything else, they are a park for a reason, in that they're open to visitors to come and learn. And if you remember from that slide where I put up the Organic Act, that's exactly what the parks are supposed to do. We're supposed to preserve what's there, but also provide for the enjoyment of visitors. And this is a big challenge. I think it's a big challenge everywhere. It's a big challenge here because we're a recreation area and we're just open for visitors to come recreate. We see, of course, when you open up a site and put it on a map and lead tours there and put up signs, that those sites tend to be the most damaged. We have a huge problem with graffiti in this park, and vandalism is pretty rampant everywhere, but especially at those sites that are marked on the map. Go here. So this is our big challenge. And it's never an easy answer in terms of, well, why don't you just close it? Because we don't want to close everything. We want things to be open for people to go enjoy and learn, but we also can't, we can't have a ranger present at every single one of our thousands and thousands of sites. A lot of parks will kind of try to balance the preservation versus education by opening up just a handful of sites and closing everything else. So at a lot of parks, you can only walk where there's a marked trail. You can only go to sites that have a trail to them. And this works well at some parks. And that way, things that are closed tend to be better protected. Some parks, like Glen Canyon, don't do that. You can actually go almost anywhere in this park, unless it's marked. Don't go there. But if it's not marked closed, then it's open and you can go there. And a few parks work that way. And then we mostly try to preserve by just not telling people where things are and trying hard to educate folks about how to visit well. But this is a big challenge. It continues to be a challenge. And we want to keep sites open to the public, but we've actually had to close some because of damage. So yeah, it's not an easy answer. And it doesn't take very many bad actors to really ruin a site. So it's a constant process of trying to be vigilant about making sure people know what to do. And we've also had a lot of success with removing graffiti. When graffiti gets put in a site, if you remove it, it tends to come back even slower because people are more likely to carve their name where they see other names already. Another challenge is just general impacts to sites. These can include natural things like erosion. Erosion will just naturally wear away sites over time, and we can't stop that process. So we maybe pick a few sites to stabilize and kind of slow erosion, and other sites we can't really do a whole lot. Cattle, as I mentioned before, cattle can be a big deal in places where they can get to. So that can create some damage. Visitors, even visitors who really mean to be respectful, if you have a whole bunch of visitors all doing the right thing, you can still have impacts on a site. So at a lot of sites, what we see is what we term social trails, which is just, a trail created through a site because so many people walk through there. So while the visitors who do graffiti and vandalism are especially harmful, just having the number of people come through the park can do harm because just those cumulative effects of lots of people walking through. And then this is pretty unique to Glen Canyon. There's a few other parks where this is the case, but a lot of our sites are underwater and the lake changes all the time. This is a really big challenge for us. Interestingly, we do have one site that's underwater that we regularly monitor, the Charles Spencer Shipwreck. Shipwreck is a little bit of a dramatic word, but it is a ship that is wrecked, that is underwater. It's in the Colorado River. And our dive team regularly monitors it, and it's a cultural resource, so we're preserving it, leaving it in place in the river, but regularly monitoring it to see how it's changing and what kind of things are affecting it. We have a lot more sites that are underwater in Lake Powell, but of course, Lake Powell is really deep, so the dive team does not monitor sites in the lake. But we know that there are lots of sites underwater, and most of the time we don't do anything with them. But if they're near the lake shore, that's really important for us to be able to know where they are and go monitor, because if the lake level drops enough, more of those sites become exposed. And then the changing lake also really affects our access. So a lot of these sites, if the lake wasn't here, they would be really hard to access. Sites that are harder to access tend to be less impacted by visitors and vandalism. And so sometimes the remoteness really protects a site, but it also makes it harder for us to get there and monitor and do any kind of work. But if it's easier for us to get to, of course, that means it's easier for visitors to get to. So that's a challenge we're always trying to balance. We can't really do anything about changing visitor access because it tends to just be dependent on how high the lake is. As the lake goes up, then you can boat into more canyons, which opens up more areas for easy hiking. As the lake goes down, it exposes other areas. We can't really control that, but we try to deal with it as best we can. Going to sites in times of year when they're easier to get to, for example, or if we know, okay, this is an area that visitors really go to when the lake is low, we try to go and monitor those areas at that time. So this is a big logistical challenge for us. That's also just tied to the lake. Okay, so I'm wrapping up. If any of this is interesting to you all, managing resources in a national park, what can you do to get involved, to help, to be well educated? First of all, if you visit a park, any park, but Glen Canyon specifically, just make sure you're visiting with respect. If you find an archaeological site, don't collect any artifacts, don't move any artifacts. The context of where the artifacts are is really the most important piece of information about them. So don't move them around the site, don't put them in a pile, don't bury them, don't hide them, just leave them where they are. Don't share locations. If you take photos of archaeological sites, take off the geotag before you put it on social media. If there's signs, if there's a trail and it says stay on trail, please stay on the trail. If the sign says, don't climb here, don't climb. So just follow the rules. If you're in an archaeological site or any kind of cultural property, try to minimize your impact. Don't camp, don't eat in a site. Just try to do as little harm as possible. Don't climb on walls, all those sorts of things. If you think you found something that needs to be brought to the attention of the land managing agency, maybe you think, oh my gosh, I found something that I really think is going to get stolen if you don't collect it. the best thing to do is take a photo and a GPS point and tell a ranger, don't collect it yourself. So best practices for visiting archaeological sites. And if you want to get more involved, other than just being a respectful visitor, you can volunteer. So the Park Service has a volunteer website where it's just general volunteer opportunities. A lot of those are not archaeologically specific volunteers, but if you just want to be in a national park, you can go volunteer in a park for a few months. I think because of COVID right now, there's a lot fewer volunteer opportunities, but they do still exist. If you want to volunteer here at Glen Canyon, we have a volunteer program right here. And this is on hold because of COVID, but hopefully it will happen again at some point. So just mark that website as a place to go check as COVID situation changes. We'll be doing some more volunteer programs. The two big ones we have in the park are the trash tracker and the grit team. So you can volunteer to go out on the lake for a few days and clean up trash or help clean up graffiti. And sometimes the graffiti team works in archaeological sites. They work with my crew to go out and properly remove graffiti in an archaeological site, but they do graffiti removal all over the place. It's a lot of fun. I'm not sure when that will start again. So sorry, I don't have a direct answer for you, but that's the website. And then Megan will include that in the survey she sends out. If you want to go even deeper and you're like really interested in managing archaeological sites, you could volunteer to become a site steward. So this program means you get assigned a specific 1 or 2 archaeological sites that you commit to going out and monitoring. It might be once a year, twice a year, or 4 times a year. You can sign up. You have to go through a training to learn how to kind of properly document archaeological sites. And then you get assigned your site, and then you just go there. You fill out the forms, you do the paperwork, you look at what's changed in the site. Is there any damage, vandalism? And this is a really great program because, you know, my staff is small and we have a huge park, and I think that's the same at many other parks. But visitors who are really interested in knowledgeable about archaeology can help us by going out and looking at sites that we just don't have time to get to that often. So the state of Arizona has a site stewards program, and we work with them for the portion of our park that's in Arizona. And then the state of Utah, they don't have one yet. But if you're interested, just bookmark that website and watch for it in the next year. The state of Utah is starting one. They are starting a new program out of their state history department that will be a statewide site stewards program that you can sign up, you can go to a training. I think they're looking at developing some online virtual training. So you can go and get all the training you need, sign up and, you know, tell them, where do you live? How far are you willing to travel? If you live in Flagstaff, are you willing to travel to you know, southern Utah to monitor sites? They'll let you do that. You just tell them which areas you're interested in. Do you have a 4-wheel drive vehicle? Can you hike a couple miles? Do you have a boat? They'll match you with a site that meets your abilities. And if you specifically want to monitor sites in Glen Canyon, you can put that on the form. So this is all coming soon, and Utah is just developing it. But we'd love to have site stewards sign up to monitor sites in either state. They're run separately through the states, so you'll have to pick one or the other, or do both of them separately. So I hope some of you are interested in that. We would really love to see some site stewards. So that's all for my talk. I can take some questions. Megan, do they type the questions in the box?
Yeah, so anybody who has, well, you can do it one of 2 ways. You can either go in the chat box, and I realize my finger's pointing in the wrong direction that way, and or there's the Q&A, which I have open also. We've got a few minutes yet, so if anybody has any questions. Amy, this is so interesting. I'm kind of kicking myself for not realizing just how incredible the Glen Canyon area is. Like, it's so much more than I thought.
Yeah, in a lot of folks think of Lake Powell, which is a big thing here, right? It takes a lot of visitors, and it's the reason a lot of visitors come is to boat on Lake Powell, but there's a whole lot more besides the lake. Oh, I got a fly. Sorry.
I don't see any questions. So everyone, thank you all for joining us tonight. I'm going to make sure I send out an email that has the resources that Amy included. And of course, thank you so much to Amy. She gave her time freely to make sure that this could be a free presentation for everybody. So we appreciate your time so much, your expertise. This was a fabulous presentation. And yeah, I hope to see everybody at our Comet Talk next week. And if we don't see you anytime soon, have a wonderful, safe, fabulous holiday and have a wonderful evening, everybody.